On my 25th birthday, my parents gave my sister a check for $240,000. They gave me an empty chair, not a metaphorical one, a literal, antique, empty dining chair placed right where my seat at the table should have been. They said it was for my future potential, a space for me to fill when I finally amounted to something. My sister, Isabella, laughed so hard she almost choked on her champagne. That empty chair became a throne. Not for me, but for the ruin I was about to invite into their lives. They thought they were shaming me, the family failure. They had no idea they were performing the first step of a ritual, making an offering to something ancient and hungry. Stick around. I'll tell you how I made sure that debt was paid in full, and how my sister's dream wedding became her waking nightmare dot in the architecture of my family. My sister Isabella was the marble colonnade, beautiful, prominent, and designed to be admired. I was the crack in the foundation, the part you plaster over and pretend isn't there. Bella was a budding influencer, an entrepreneur, a master of social currency. She was engaged to Julian, a man whose family crest probably had dollar signs on it. They were a power couple, a brand, and my parents' crowning achievement. I, on the other hand, was a ghost at their feast. My name is Leo, and I'm a folklorist. I study dead languages and dying traditions. I find meaning in the forgotten whispers of the past. To my parents, this was the academic equivalent of being a professional disappointment. Leo collects stories, my mother would tell her friends, her voice dripping with pity. Isabella is a story. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was the family's operating system. When Bella got an A in business school, she got a new convertible. When I was published in a respected historical journal, my father asked if it paid well. It didn't. The conversation ended there. I was tolerated, a strange piece of furniture they couldn't quite get rid of. The only person who ever saw me was my grandmother. She smelled of old books and chamomile tea, and her house was a sanctuary. She's the one who nurtured my love for history. She'd give me strange little trinkets from her travels, a worn coin from Istanbul, a pressed flower from the Alps, a small silver locket she never opened. Some things hold more than memories, Leo, she used to say, her eyes twinkling. They hold echoes. When she passed away, she left her entire estate in a trust to be managed by my parents. She had told me on one of our last afternoons together that she had made sure I would be taken care of, that I'd have the freedom to pursue my work without financial worry. I believed her. That was my first mistake. My second was believing my parents would ever honor her wishes over their own ambitions. The tension built for a year. Every family gathering became a showcase for Bella's wedding planning. The venue, a historic countryside estate. The dress, a custom-made monstrosity of lace and silk. The guest list, a who's who of the city's elite. I was expected to attend, to smile, to applaud. A silent ghost, bearing witness to the celebration of everything I was not. They needed me there as a yardstick, a dark backdrop to make their stars shine brighter. The betrayal wasn't delivered in a lawyer's stuffy office. It was served up as the main course at my own birthday dinner, held at my parents' house. It was a calculated, theatrical act of cruelty. After a tense, Bella-centric dinner, my father stood up, clinking a fork against his wine glass. "Well, everyone," he began, beaming. "As some of you know, the final arrangements for Mother's estate have been settled. In honor of Leah's birthday, we thought it was the perfect time to share the news." He looked at me, a strange, pitying smile on his face. My heart, against my better judgment, leaped with a flicker of hope. My mother wheeled in a single, ornate dining chair from the living room and placed it in the empty spot next to her where I was supposed to be sitting. I had been relegated to a stool at the end of the table. "Isabella," my father said, producing a long white envelope. "Your grandmother was so proud of the woman you've become. The way you've built a life for yourself, your engagement to Julian. She wanted to invest in that future. He handed the envelope to Bella. Her perfectly manicured hands tore it open. Inside was a cashier's check. Oh my God, she breathed, her eyes widening. $240,000. The room erupted. Julian kissed her. My mother cried tears of joy. My father puffed out his chest like a proud peacock. I just sat there, my blood turning to ice. Then my father turned to me. The room fell silent. And Leo, he said, his voice taking on a somber, patronizing tone. Grandma worried about you. She knew you were still finding your path. She believed in giving you not a handout, but an incentive. He gestured to the empty chair. She left you this space. An empty chair for your potential. A place at the table for you to earn, to fill when you finally make something of yourself. It's a symbol, son, of our belief in you. The lie was so audacious, so breathtakingly cruel, that I couldn't even speak. They had stolen my inheritance, my grandmother's final gift, and twisted it into this grotesque motivational speech. Bella, holding her check, let out a sharp, cruel laugh. An empty chair? That's perfect. It's the most you've ever contributed to this family, Leo. My mother shushed her, but she was smiling. A switch flipped inside me. Not a hot, angry switch. A cold one. Like a circuit breaker deep in the basement of my soul, plunging everything into darkness. I looked at their smiling faces, flushed with triumph and champagne, and I didn't see my family anymore. I saw debtors. I stood up slowly, my movements calm and deliberate. Thank you, I said, my voice unnervingly steady. For the gift. I'll be sure to use it. I walked out of the house and didn't look back. The war had been declared, but they were the only ones who didn't know it yet. In the quiet of my apartment, surrounded by my books and forgotten histories, I finally opened my grandmother's locket. I'd kept it on my desk for years, a silver keepsake. It was old and tarnished, refusing to be polished. Inside, there was no space for a picture. Instead, folded into a tiny, tight square, was a piece of vellum, brittle with age. The ink was faded, written in a language I barely recognized as an obscure pre-Roman dialect. It wasn't a letter. It was a recipe, a folk charm. My grandmother, a woman of echoes, had left me her true inheritance after all. The charm was called the Weaver's Claim. It wasn't for summoning wealth or cursing enemies. It was a ritual of balance, of karmic debt collection. It called upon an ancient, neutral entity, the silent weaver that enforces familial oaths and binds fortune to its rightful owner. To break a bond of inheritance, the charm said, was to unravel the thread of the offender's own fate. The instructions were specific, poetic, and chilling. To reclaim what was stolen, one must weave a new fate using 3 components. A thread from the debtor's proudest garment, freely given or taken unseen. A tear of betrayal. Caught before it touches the ground. An offering of gold. Returned to the earth from which it came. The final binding had to be performed at the height of the debtor's triumph, turning their greatest joy into the source of their unraveling. Bella's wedding, a cold, exhilarating purpose filled me. This was my field of study brought to terrifying life. First, the tear. The night of the betrayal, as I sat in my car, a single hot tear of rage and sorrow had fallen. It landed on the cool glass face of my watch. Before it could evaporate, I had pressed a microscope slide against it, sealing the tear, a perfect crystalline record of my pain. Next, the gold. My grandmother had given me a small gold signet ring when I was a boy. It was the only thing of value I owned. Using a small crucible and a blowtorch from my restoration toolkit, I melted it down in my kitchen sink, the metal hissing as it returned to a liquid state. I poured the molten gold into the soil of a small potted plant, an offering returned to the earth. Finally, the thread. This was the most difficult. I feigned a desire to make peace and asked to see Bella's wedding dress. My mother, eager to show it off, arranged a visit to the bridal boutique for the final fitting. While Bella was preening in front of the mirror, lost in her own reflection, I knelt down, pretending to admire the intricate lacework of the train. With a tiny, sharp pair of scissors from my pocket, I snipped a single shimmering silk thread. No one noticed. For weeks, I prepared. I kept the tear, the soil with the gold, and the thread inside the silver locket, which I wore under my shirt. It grew strangely warm against my skin. As the wedding day approached, signs of the charm's power began to manifest. The historic estate they'd booked had a sudden, inexplicable termite infestation, forcing them to move the wedding to a sterile, modern hotel ballroom, a downgrade Bella lamented loudly on social media. Her celebrity makeup artist canceled, citing a family emergency. A crate of their vintage champagne was mysteriously smashed during delivery. These were small things, whispers of the coming storm. Bella grew more and more frantic, a Britizilla on the verge of a nervous breakdown. My family, blinded by their own arrogance, saw it all as a string of bad luck. They had no idea it was the sound of a thread being pulled, the first sign of a tapestry beginning to unravel. The wedding day was a monument to narcissism. The hotel ballroom was draped in white silk and dripping with thousands of white roses that filled the air with a cloying, funereal scent. My family, dressed in their finest, greeted guests with plastic smiles, papering over the stress of the last few weeks. I was there in a simple, dark suit, the dutiful brother, the ghost at the feast. No one paid me much attention. I was just part of the scenery. I kept my hand in my pocket, my fingers wrapped around the silver locket. It was hot now, almost burning. The ceremony began. Bella glided down the aisle on my father's arm, a vision in her ridiculously expensive dress. She looked triumphant, a queen reclaiming her throne after a minor rebellion. She stood opposite Julian at the altar, under an arch of wilting roses. The officiant began the vows. "Do you, Julian, take Isabella?" This was the moment. The height of her triumph. I closed my eyes. I pictured the empty chair. I felt the heat of the locket, and as instructed by the vellum, I tied the stolen silk thread into a tight, single knot around the locket's hinge, binding all the components together. "What was taken is reclaimed," I whispered, the ancient words feeling like sand in my mouth. "The thread is cut. The debt is paid." A sudden, impossible cold swept through the ballroom. The doors were closed, but a wind, smelling of damp earth and decay, snuffed out half the candles on the altar. Guests shivered and looked around in confusion. Then it started. A single thread on the sleeve of Bella's dress pulled loose. Then another, and another. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The pristine, custom-made gown began to unravel, not just a tear. It was disintegrating, the threads pulling apart as if eaten by invisible moths, turning to dust and falling to the floor in a soft gray rain. The intricate lace patterns frayed into nothing. The silk became a web of tatters. Within seconds, the $1,000 dress was a collection of pathetic, hanging rags. Revealing the cheap corset and undergarments beneath, Bella looked down, her face contorting from confusion to pure animalistic terror. She shrieked, a sound that cut through the stunned silence. Julian stared at her, his jaw slack. But he wasn't just seeing a ruined dress. His eyes were wide with a deeper horror, as if the glamour surrounding her had been stripped away along with the silk. He saw the rot underneath. He took a step back, then another, recoiling from her as if she were something diseased and unclean. My mother screamed. My father rushed forward, but there was nothing to fix. The guests were on their feet, some filming with their phones, others backing away in superstitious fear. The dream wedding had become a freak show. Bella stood on the altar, exposed and hysterical, her life's proudest moment turning into her ultimate public humiliation, a ruin of her own making. The wedding was, of course, over. Julian called off the engagement the next day, mumbling something about a moment of terrible clarity and refusing to ever see Bella again. The viral videos of the haunted dress made my family a laughingstock. Their social standing, the only thing they ever truly valued, was annihilated. The story of their financial cruelty towards me eventually leaked, and their reputation was ruined beyond repair. They lost everything that mattered to them. I never got the money. Like the charm said, it wasn't about gain. It was about balance. I continue my quiet life, surrounded by my books and stories, but I am not the same. The silver locket never leaves my side. It is always warm now, a constant, comforting weight against my skin, a reminder of the power that sleeps in forgotten things. I did not just perform a ritual. I entered into a contract. The silent weaver balanced the scales, but its nature is balance itself. And a debt has now been incurred on my side. They left me an empty chair to represent my future, a space for me to fill. They had no idea that something ancient and patient had been waiting for just such an invitation. And now, whenever I sit at my own table, I can almost feel a presence in the chair across from me, a silent partner waiting to see what I will do next. The chair is no longer empty. What would you have done in this situation?